Thank you. Rules Committee will be in order, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are waiting for a few more people who are on their way, and with that said, I would like to thank each of you for being here today and to acknowledge the receipt of our new artwork here in the Rules Committee. And all these paintings are by a John Andernock, a Texas impressionist, often called the father of Texas painting. And each of the pieces that are here today actually were in the Bush White House, and they represent landscapes of Texas. The thing that I find most interesting about these is that when he was asked about where he was from, he would always show his painting. He'd say, "It is where I'm from, it's where I'm going, and it's where I will end up being. My home is in Texas." So I know the gentlemen, the two of them that we have in here, the gentleman Dr. Burgess and the gentleman Chairman Henserling, understand that statement well. With that said, for those of you who had not been here earlier, it replaces the things which we did have on the wall, which was a great big cow, a longhorn, so to speak, that was on the wall, and my Aggie friends, I think, objected to that, so we changed that around. So for those of you who want to know what we're doing here today, we're welcoming the new artwork also to our walls. My wife picked these out, and she is happy, and so, as the old saying goes, so am I.
Mr. Chairman, can I give a brief remark on the artwork of the room?
Gentleman's recognized.
You know, I, as you know, have the seat at the far end, and I have to say I really enjoyed the Malibu Beach House view on many late nights on the Rules Committee. And I was wondering if perhaps Mr. Dreyer might be able to put that on loan back to us at some point.
Is the gentleman suggesting that the artwork that's presently been selected does not suit you?
It's no beach house.
No beach house. You know, and I thank you very much for your addition to this. I do miss David Dreyer a lot, and David's artwork that was here did follow him back to California, and so we're trying to do the best we can. Having a Texan is different than having somebody from California. Appreciate the gentleman's observations.
But I wasn't commenting on the artistic merit. I was commenting on the subject of
the subject. Yeah.
If the gentleman will yield.
We'll see what we can do. Dr. Burgess?
I would just point out that while this appears to be a painting of cactus and various desert vegetation, I'm not sure of the location, but it looks to me to be very close to the Guadalupe Mountains in West Texas. And any student of geology knows that at one time was a seabed, and the Guadalupe Mountains were in fact a barrier island. So if you use your imagination, there is a Cretaceous era beach house available for you on that particular ocean.
Was that 4,000 years ago?
Substantially longer.
I agree.
A little bit of fun today. I also want to thank each of you for being here, and this afternoon we have an opportunity to consider two bills. First, the House will take steps to provide some common sense accountability measures to the Securities and Exchange Commission, known as the SEC, by requiring that the SEC operate under the same cost-benefit analysis rules that President Obama previously outlined for other non-independent agencies. The SEC Regulatory Accountability Act is a sensible solution to prevent unnecessary and burdensome regulations. I will tell you that today we are delighted to not only have two stellar members of the House, but also those that are prepared to discuss this issue. And I would welcome to the Rules Committee the Honorable Maxine Waters, who is the ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services, and the young chairman of the committee, the gentleman from Dallas, Texas, Chairman Henschel. And I would ask both of you to please come up to the table. And without objection, any thing in writing that you have will be entered in the record, and we welcome you. I am aware, as you are aware, today is a busy day, and it's either a good thing or a bad thing that we're not fully staffed today with our membership, but we are delighted that you're here to consider this important presentation. Gentleman from Texas recognized. Excuse me, I'm sorry. The gentleman from Colorado wished to make an opening statement also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is the prerogative of the ranking member to do so, and I appreciate the chair for recognizing me to make an opening remark. I think that there are, again, a laudable concept here, and certainly better cost-benefit analysis, finding whether things are outdated. Largely, however, there's a question of workload. It's my understanding that with these regulations, it would take an extra 20 people just to kind of get back to having your head above water where they are. And the problem, frankly, among others at the SEC, is they aren't able to move fast enough on other things, like the jobs bill, which this Congress passed on a bipartisan basis, the implementation of crowdfunding, the private equity solicitation. These things are delayed over there. And here we have an additional paperwork requirement with laudable goals, but adding at least 20 people just to get back to where they were. I question the need for adding more bureaucracy and bureaucratic requirements at the SEC when they don't seem to be able to get a lot of the workload done, like the Jobs Act, which this Congress passed. And I worry about how much more something like this could delay a practical, common sense, regulation easing measure like the Jobs Act, which we continue to push the SEC to move forward on as rapidly as possible, consistent with the intent of Congress on a bipartisan basis, which passed that so overwhelmingly. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Obviously, the gentleman has extensive background in understanding the careful balance of the role of government, regulatory agencies, and the free market. And I know that in your business life, you saw this firsthand, and I think the balance that you bring of these observations are important. And that's why we've got two of the most leading-edge experts on this issue that will be able to provide us and our colleagues with the answers to exactly the same questions that you bring up. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ranking member of the committee as well. First, an indulgence, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the artwork. The Texan in me appreciates the addition of the Bluebonnets. The Aggie in me appreciates the subtraction of the Longhorns. Now that I have that out of my system, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Rules Committee today on H.R. 1062, the SEC Regulatory Accountability Act. I will be brief and summarize and would ask that my written testimony be entered into the record. H.R. 1062 is a very common sense, simple bill, quite short one, I believe weighing in at about a dozen pages, that simply requires the SEC to conduct cost-benefit analysis to ensure that the benefits of its regulation absolutely justify the cost. In many respects, this carries out a directive and executive order of the Obama administration, Executive Order 13563, which requires government agencies to conduct this type of analysis. It did not extend to independent agencies, and we believe that particularly with respect to the SEC, the Financial Services Committee believes that it should. In fact, that is a view that I believe was also shared by former SEC Chairman Shapiro, who indicated that the SEC would voluntarily abide by the executive order. And again, the bill simply requires that the SEC chief economist conduct cost-benefit analysis, requires that the benefits proposed justify their cost before the SEC can issue a rule, and that the SEC identify and assess alternatives. To all members of the committee, I think one thing all of our colleagues share in common is a great desire to see that we have a healthier economy, that our constituents are more secure economically in the jobs they hold, that they have brighter futures, for their children. And in order to do this, part of the mission of the SEC has everything to do with capital formation, ensuring that we have efficient markets. And in order to do that, they have to simply conduct cost-benefit analysis, which is common sense for every family and every business in America. And thankfully, due to President Obama's executive order, apparently with respect to every other federal agency that is not independent of nature. So again, Mr. Chairman, other members of the committee, it's a simple bill. We had, and we would request that this committee adopt a structured rule for this bill as it proceeds to the floor on Friday. And I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee had. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the chairman for his presentation. Gentlewoman is recognized from California.
Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the opportunity to be before you today. We're here on the most important piece of legislation. This particular bill, H.R. 1062, is important for a number of reasons. First of all, let me take you back to Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank reform included in it something known as proxy access. Proxy access, as defined in Dodd-Frank, would simply allow our institutional investors, for example, to use their proxy materials to be able to nominate to the boards of directors of these major corporations that they're investing in. Don't forget, these institutional investors are investing for firefighters, teachers, and public employees, and they want the opportunity to have a say on the board to make sure that these companies are conducting themselves in a way that will benefit these pensioners. And so we had proxy access. There are those who just don't agree with these institutional investors having the ability to use their proxy materials in order to nominate to these boards. And so they teamed up with some of the big business interests outside of Congress and went to court. They went to the District Court of Appeals here in Washington, D.C. and got a ruling. And basically the court said that the benefit analysis, the cost-benefit analysis was not good enough, that somehow it was arbitrary, and that they set it aside. And so the SEC went back and they did everything that they could to try and improve on what they already had. And I have to share with you that the SEC goes above and beyond the call of duty on cost-benefit analysis beyond any other agencies of government. And so now this bill would like to add to the requirements of SEC on rulemaking and cost-benefit analysis. They want to pile on so much that the SEC will be stopped dead in its track and it won't be able to do its work. And so we believe that this is not in the best interest of those people that would have protection under something like a proxy access and other concerns that may arise. We would simply say that this bill should not be supported. We are anxious to support Democratic amendments to the bill, but we believe that this bill it could be harmful, and we believe that the amendments that are being proposed by the Republicans are not amendments that would be helpful in allowing the SEC to get its work done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I could direct a first question to the chairman of the committee. I heard, I believe, what was just said by Ms. Waters, and I tended to view that this was as the SEC promulgates rules about the businesses that they are overseeing, that they would provide an understanding, a cost-benefit analysis, so to speak, of the practical effect of their rulemaking. She tended to say to me, I think, in essence, that companies, that outside influences to companies and the profitability about what they did with their money. Are we talking about the same type of thing, or do I have it wrong? Because I had understood this was on the SEC about rule making that they make about regulations that have an impact, not on a company and their assets and how they spend their money. Can the Chairman shed some light on that?
Well, my understanding is your understanding, Mr. Chairman, so you'd have to direct the question to the ranking member. The relevance I see on the proxy access rule is that a unanimous decision of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said that the SEC was not undertaking essentially cost-benefit analysis. And I believe I have the exact language here. The unanimous opinions in setting and promulgating the rule, quote, inconsistently and opportunistically frame the cost and benefits of the rule, failed adequately to quantify the certain cost or to explain why those costs could not be quantified, neglected to support its predictive judgments, contradicted itself, and failed to respond to substantial problems raised by the commenters. And so, to me, the relevance of the case is why the statute is, why we're proposing this bill in the first place, is because the SEC has not done its work, which again, I think most people would view this, Mr. Chairman, as essentially a jobs and economy impact statement. You know, as you're promulgating a rule, ultimately, what's going to be the impact on people who do the work, pay the taxes, pay the bills, struggling to send their kids to college, worrying about their health care bills. So to me, it's just so common sense, and I don't understand why some would want to be against, again, what is essentially contained within the President's own executive order.
Ms. Waters?
Well, the lawsuit was initiated in the courts by the Business Roundtable, and I think joined by the Chamber of Commerce. When you ask whether or not the SEC had done its work, and I think my colleague indicated that they had not, I think that perhaps that is not described correctly. Of course, the SEC had done its cost-benefit analysis work. However, it was challenged. It was challenged by the Business Roundtable and the Chamber because what they did effectively was to describe what the SEC should have done or could have done or what they think should be included in their responsibility in doing these cost-benefit analysis. Unfortunately, the court agreed with them. And now what they're trying to do with this bill is to add even more requirements on the SEC in its cost-benefit analysis to bog down the SEC when they feel that they can point to anything that looks like a weakness that they can tweak so that they won't have to deal with the SEC's successful rulemaking. As I pointed out when I first started talking about proxy access, this is what triggered all of this, proxy access. And as I attempted to explain, we did proxy access in Dodd-Frank because our institutional investors for public employees, for the most part, basically said, look, many of these boards are not acting in the best interest of the investors. We're investing this money so that our first responders, for example, our police and our firefighters and our teachers will actually have credible pensions when they retire. And if we don't pay attention and you have board members who are not acting in the best interest of investors, if you have board members who don't pay attention and just rely sometimes on the CEO or the president, we don't think we're being well represented. And so, if we can use our proxy access materials by which to nominate, simply nominate those to serve on the board, in the best interest of the investors, then we think we will be putting our first responders, for example, and other public employees at risk. So this is how this all started. And now what we see is the same interests are back in court with two other bills. And they're going to keep doing this in order to bog down the SEC so that they won't be able to get their rulemaking done, and thus they win and not have the kind of oversight that is needed in many of these areas.
I think I'm enlightened. Thank you very much. Chairman Cole? Please, for the record, let us know we are in a quorum circumstance, and that occurred during the testimony that was being taken place. Hi.
Thank you.
Welcome. Gentlewoman, ranking members recognized.
Thank you very much, and please forgive me for being late. I had an appointment I had to keep from the district. I won't ask questions because I wasn't here to hear your testimony, but I appreciate what you're doing. I'm really concerned, Ms. Waters, as you are, that the overburdening of the SEC and a lot of other requirements without extra money to be able to do it is not going to help. I think will unduly burden them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. By the way, so that the ranking member is aware, we talked about our new artwork that we have here, and
Oh my goodness!
I recall your wonderful statements about my steer that we had on the wall, and as I
I
recall,
happen to love cows now.
well,
very fond of
I'm
it.
all for beef too, but we've got new
Okay.
Texas pictures here, and in your stead, on behalf of the management of your side, the gentleman from Colorado asked for David Dreyer's artwork back from California.
That picture of Malibu, was
The
really-
Malibu.
that encouraged us all to work
That
hard
really
and get
did.
outside.
That
Yeah.
really did. Anyway, so we've made sure now that we
Well,
have
it's
better
very nice.
artwork, perhaps. And the
Yeah.
gentleman from Texas A&M, the young chairman of the Financial Services Committee, said he liked it better without the steer in there. As you know, is a symbol of the University of Texas.
Absolutely.
So
Longhorns,
we're
right.
we're doing a whole lot better.
And thank you. Tell your wife I really like to see.
Well,
it. It's
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a vote on this art. I'm just an observer. I'm from California, and I sure did like that Malibu scene.
That was, we all did. We all did. I wasn't too upset with Niagara Falls either when I was sitting in his chair.
Niagara Falls is a beautiful sight also. It's, I will tell Karen that you enjoy her artwork better than the one that I picked earlier. We'll see how that works. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized. Ms. Polis?
Yes, first, for the ranking member, thank you, Ms. Waters, for coming before our committee. What important work of the SEC could this bill wind up delaying if it passes? What are some of the critical things that they need to do that if they add all these requirements, it could simply get in the way or delay them from accomplishing?
Well, as you know, the SEC must do the rulemaking on everything that comes before them. We have some very, very serious issues when we deal with derivatives, which are very important to the reform of the financial services community in Wall Street. They're backed up, and they need resources. Unfortunately, my friends on the opposite side of the aisle does not support adequate resources for the SEC to do its work. Aside from everything else, just the Dodd-Frank reform alone requires more personnel in order to deal with these very serious issues. So as we look at our institutions, as we look at our big banks and our financial institutions, and whether we're talking about work that we have to do relative to money laundering, relative to LIBOR or any of these issues, the SEC must be empowered and supported to do its work, and this just bogs them down further by putting additional requirements on the rulemaking and cost-benefit analysis in particular.
Mr. Polis, would you
I'd be
mind-
happy to yield to the gentleman from New York.
Something I should have said here. First, I want to ask unanimous consent
Without
with the
objection.
administration statement in. But I have an amendment to this bill, which I know is not going to be put in order, although I do know that when I sat in his seat, we decided what was in order and what wasn't. But anyway, I had a piece of legislation that you may recall called the Stock Act that I carried it for 3 terms with 7 sponsors until CBS
Thank you.
60 Minutes brought it up one night, and in 2 weeks I had 286 sponsors and a half. The Senate loved it so much they took it up first, so we didn't have a vote on it here. But half that bill had to deal with something called political intelligence. And it was terribly important. We simply wanted people who involved themselves in political intelligence to make sure that members and staff knew who they were, that they were going to make money off it, and that they would register as lobbyists do. Senator Lieberman didn't know about it. They got talked into, they and the leadership here, into substituting that with a study. And so the study came out, and it was here, not here, there, but the whole study was refuted then by the Columbia Law School Review. So we're still back where we were, but something interesting happened here in April that I want to explain to you all what political intelligence is. There was a statement to be made on what to do about Medicare Advantage, if you recall that. As I did, we're going to cut 2% out of it. All of a sudden, we find out that they raised it, the money revenue, 3%. Now, the afternoon of April 1st, just 30, 40 minutes before CMS delivered that statement of what they were going to do, a young man who used to work for Senator Grassley, who left there and was working for a law firm and also connected with a political intelligence firm, got together, and in the last 18 minutes of trading on the stock market that day, $663 million was invested in 3 healthcare companies. Now, the SEC now is looking into that. They have subpoenaed a number of people and looking into it. And this is why one of the things I want the SEC to have money to be able to do that. Now, let me tell you what happened to political intelligence. As I told you, Senator Lieberman took it out. But Senator Grassley had an amendment that passed the Senate and put political intelligence back into the bill. But when it came over here, it was taken back out and made into a suspension, which could not be amended, and passed with all but 2 votes in the House. So my amendment today was that I would like to make an amendment, Mr. Chair, that we could put that back in. I hope to speak on that later. But that's the kind of thing that we're asking the SEC to do. And I'm not going to give up on the political intelligence. We've just been set back a year or 2 here. But I could not have asked in a million years for a better example of what I was talking about. And some unknown trader made about $396,000 that afternoon. And the whole idea is if you work for the Congress of the United States or you're privileged to be a member of the Congress of the United States, information that you have should not be used for anybody else. If it's not available to everybody, it's not available to anybody. Keep that to yourselves. That is your job. And that, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do. So I certainly understand the SEC is terribly important here, that we get that part done. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Polis, for yielding.
I thank the gentlelady for her comments. I was one of those that, after the press coverage was drawn to co-sponsor her act, I think to raise awareness.
It was a phenomenon of all.
It raised awareness about.
I know now how to pass a bill.
That's right. Just get it featured on national
on 60
TV.
Minutes, and you're in.
Absolutely.
The 60 Minutes ran on Sunday night. Monday night, I'm on the floor, and everybody comes running in and says, I'm on your bill, I'm on your bill. I said, which one, which one? I had no idea, because I hadn't seen it on 60 Minutes. Honestly, within 2 weeks, 286 people.
I hope that we can accomplish the same thing for the gentlelady's bill on banning prophylactic use of antibiotics on farmed animals. Very important public health issue, and one that is worthy of the same type of coverage of that other one. And that's one I'm a co-sponsor of before it becomes famous. So once it becomes famous, we'll add the other 200.
Well, I don't see we'll see that fame and fortune again, but I will tell you that there's an awful lot of publicity out here about that trading and what political intelligence is, and it behooves all of us to get on the right side of it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Thank the gentlelady. I'll be happy to go to the, I control the time, I'll be happy to go to the gentlelady, and then I have an additional question.
Thank you so very much. I certainly agree with you, Ms. Slaughter, and I think that I wish your legislation could certainly be made in order, because not only must we really get a handle on this so-called political intelligence, not only should we have legislation that would discourage workers, but it protects us. Indeed. Also as members who could inadvertently have conversations with folks.
With whom you're speaking.
Absolutely. So I think it's very important, and I think I may be one of those two who got on the bill after 60 Minutes.
Well, everybody was sure welcome. I'll tell you, that was the best bipartisan bill I've ever.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polis.
Thank you. And a question for the chair, just about the challenges of cost-benefit analysis when you're dealing with catastrophic risk and risk of meltdown. I mean, for instance, the cost, if you will, of what happened in 2008, 2009, systemic failure. Isn't it, and of course, cost-benefit analysis is a very valuable tool, and we apply it across, and we should apply it across our various regulatory agencies. But how does one even begin to get their arms around cost-benefit analysis of systemic risk issues that really, if we were able to figure out, we would preempt, but we can't, and so we don't. And how does one account for that risk as a cost?
Well, I say to the gentleman from Colorado, we should at least try, and ultimately every single rule I would suggest ought to be balanced against the cost of jobs and the economic security of working American families in our lives. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I believe the SEC employs roughly 1,700 attorneys, and I think, as I look at my trustee staff, 59 economists. Perhaps one way we could go about it is having a little better balance between those who have JD behind their names and those who have PhD behind their names. So it's complex, but, so is healthcare, and it didn't prevent, when your party was in the majority, undertaking a rather large undertaking in the healthcare arena. So again, I would just respectfully suggest to the committee, it's a very simple proposition. And again, I don't quite understand why, if the essence is contained in the president's executive order, why we should see such pushback. We're not telling the SEC what decision they ultimately make with respect to their rulemaking, but we are suggesting that too often we look at the purported benefits of a rule without looking at, number one, the purported cost, much less the actual cost and benefits. And in a time where, again, we continue to muddle through the Great Recession with what many would offer to be a non-recovery recovery, I would think it would be something that our constituents would demand of us. The very simple proposition is that before you promulgate a rule, you understand how it's going to impact jobs and the economy and cost. And I would also think that, particularly in light of the IRS scandal that has shocked and appalled the entire country, that we would want to ensure that we are erring on the side of extra accountability for our government agencies.
Well, and of course, the danger is taxing an overtaxed agency. You mentioned 1,700 people, whatever the number is of people that are analysts there, taking 20 of them, which is the CBOS, 20 of them, 20 people off of some task they're doing, and instead of assigning them to this, could actually be increasing the risks in other areas because presumably they're doing something that otherwise reduce risks. If not, they shouldn't be funded in the first place.
If I could respond to that.
If I can go just to the ranking member for a minute, then we'll come back to chair. That'd be great. Yeah.
Moreover, this bill does not just apply to new rulemaking. This bill would require the commission to review every rulemaking it has ever issued, even those that have protected our securities markets since the Great Depression. 1 year after the adoption of this bill and every 5 years thereafter. As a result, the commission would likely have to divert huge resources from other key areas, such as I talked about before. So he mentioned 1,700 attorneys. I want to tell you, this is a shocking requirement. And 1,700 attorneys are nothing based on what this bill would do. Can you imagine having to go back to every rulemaking that it has ever issued, even those that have been protected? impacted our securities market since the Great Depression, and then 1 year after the adoption of this bill, and every 5 years thereafter, this is outrageous.
I think the gentlelady, and I guess now posing that back to the chair, so the gentlelady from California indicated that perhaps even these CBO estimates are inaccurate about 20 people, because this does open the door in all past rules. That could involve hundreds or thousands of people to pour over those. But whether it's 20 or 200 or 2,000 people, why is there time spent better doing this than, for instance, implementing the Jobs Act, which passes Congress with a strong bipartisan majority?
Well, I would say to the gentleman, that's an excellent question, and one that I would like to ask of the SEC chair, who will be appearing before our committee tomorrow morning. Why is the Securities and Exchange Commission undertaking discretionary rulemaking when mandatory rulemaking has gone, in some respects, ignored? I don't have at my fingertips the number of Dodd-Frank rulemakings that have been required that regrettably have bypassed the SEC, and yet they're putting before us a discretionary rulemaking dealing with corporations and reporting of public affairs expenditures. Meanwhile, the Jobs Act, which, as the gentleman knows, was a strong bipartisan act, has not been undertaken, which is one of the reasons that we passed legislation, again, bipartisan legislation, to force the SEC to finish this rulemaking. So I would say to some extent to the gentleman, it is a matter of priorities. And if the SEC would pay attention to its mandatory rule makings, then perhaps we wouldn't have this problem. And for those who are concerned about the burden of resources, again, it's a question of priorities. I'm not sure I heard this debate prior to the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act, which, yes, and put an incredible burden upon the SEC. But what I'm hearing is, with respect to the totality of the SEC resources, I still consider this to be a matter of prioritization and a matter of common sense. Do we not want to know how rulemaking is going to impact the jobs of our constituents? I, for one, want that knowledge, and I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that this bill is passed, because I think my constituents who work hard, the hard-working people who pay the taxes, they don't deserve anything less.
And, again, I certainly appreciate the goal. We could always use more analysis on anything. But, again, if the SEC has been unable to move forward on congressionally mandated streamlining of existing regulations under the Jobs Act, I would say that would be a priority over yet more analysis. And I think that your questioning of the SEC chair that you indicated to me you will give would have strong support from both sides of the aisle about why they're not proceeding with congressionally mandated rulemaking and what's the cause of the delays. However, I would suspect that if this bill were to become law, and a similar hearing was held in 2 or 3 years, this very act could in fact be cited as one of those reasons that they are unable to move forward with congressionally mandated rulemaking, because they are busy with their finite resources doing backward-looking cost-benefit analysis.
I would just say to the gentleman, it is an open question whether they are unable or perhaps unwilling, and perhaps a new chair begins a new era, and perhaps there could be a reprioritization of the business of the SEC, which, by the way, has received a roughly 300% increase in its budget in roughly the last 10 years. I certainly cannot think of any family in my district or business who has seen a similar increase in their budget over the last 10 years. It's not always how much money you spend, it's how you spend the money. And for an agency that could have prevented the failure of Bear Stearns and Lehman and didn't, agency that was certainly had numerous indications of the Madoff and Sanford Ponzi schemes, an agency that looked the other way with respect to our credit rating agent oligopoly, I'm not sure that the answer is merely pouring in more resources with this type of legacy until we ensure that they know how to use, that they have the proper priorities, and that they can use the resources that the taxpayers allow them to have in a more efficient and effective manner.
Gentlelady from California.
I think that you made an excellent point. If they are going to get additional impact, that would not only overburden them, but cost more money, we cannot expect that we're going to be able to do the rulemaking on things such as the jobs bill in a timely fashion. Now, we do know that on the jobs bill, I just may interject here, that while the legislation today up on the floor basically instructs them to get it done by October 1, that they already said that they would have it done by October 1. So this bill, in effect, does not make them do it, but we're going to get that done. But it has been slow because of the tremendous workload. And just think about what I just described to you, about what this bill does and how far it goes. And think about the amount of money we're going to have to spend in the courts. Because, as I said, not only were we taken to court on proxy access, there are two other bills now that the same interests have also gone to court with, and there will be more and more and more. And not only is that going to cost us a lot of money, but a lot of time, and literally destroy the efforts of our cop on the block. And while we can point to, and my colleague can point to, some missteps and some areas that were not attended to properly that caused us some harm, just think of the hundreds of thousands of good things that are done by the SEC that helps to protect the investors and the public from the kind of fraud and abuse that would occur if they were not able to do their job.
Thank the gentlelady, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. I would like to enter into the record the Statement of Administrative Policy on the SEC bill that's before us today. Gentleman, Mr. Webster is recognized. Dr. Burgess? I want to thank both of you for being here. Obviously, the Rules Committee counts on not only your expertise, but also for you to know that if you come to this committee, you'll be treated not only fairly, but being given an opportunity for full exercise of your ideas. You help us to shape not only the policy that will go to the floor, but you help us in our own insight year after year, not just the gentleman and Mrs. Slaughter, but myself who've been up here. Look forward to your testimony, the continuing opportunity that you have to bring leading edge legislation that will help our country, our financial structure become more sound, but also an understanding about the philosophies related to the conversations that you have with administrative personnel. And so I want to thank both of you for taking time today. Both of you are excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
At this time, we're going to move to the next item for consideration. This week, the House will also consider a vote to repeal what is known as Obamacare. Recent studies have shown that the law, despite its promises to make health care more affordable, we're now finding out is dramatically increasing costs on providing insurance premiums for millions of Americans. Many businesses have indicated publicly that they are hesitant to hire new employees in the face of looming mandates and costly regulations. Additionally, as a result of the law, millions of Americans are losing their current coverage and are increasingly worried about how to access quality health care. That could also be true of members of Congress who are in the process of learning about that impact that will be upon them and our staffs and our families. By repealing the Affordable Care Act, this will remove excessive bureaucracy, taxation, and unnecessarily Americans losing their insurance. I want to welcome, if I can, 4 distinguished members of Congress who will join us today. First, the gentleman from Texas, the gentleman from the committee, Dr. Burgess, who also today represents the Energy and Commerce Committee. The gentleman also, Mr. Andrews, who will join us, the gentlewoman, Mrs. Schakowsky, who serves on the Subcommittee on Health, and the gentleman, my dear friend from the state of Washington, who himself is, I believe, a physician, the gentleman, Dr. McDermott. Welcome to all four of you. I now want to recognize, if she has any statement, the gentlewoman from New York.
No, I'll just wait to hear the testimony, but thank you very much.
That'll be great. I had separated these out, and Mr. Polis had offered a statement on the first part of this, and so I thank the gentleman very, very much.
Perhaps he has one on this.
Well, he did a great job, and we're delighted that all four of you are here today. Without objection, any written statement that you have will be entered into the record, will be contained therein, and I'm delighted that you're here. I'm going to ask probably that you too, Mr. Andrews, Dr. Burgess, you all share that microphone, and certainly we will do the same on the other side. I want to welcome you. The gentleman, Dr. Burgess, is recognized.
Well, I thank the chairman for the recognition and the opportunity to be able to be here and testify today on what I think is one of the most important matters of our time. Look, this week, the United States House of Representatives is going to have a chance to correct an error that was created 3 years and 3 weeks ago in March of 2010 when the Affordable Care Act, by an accident, was signed into law. And why would I say by an accident? H.R. 3590, which is the law that passed the House that got signed by the President, actually arose in the House of Representatives as a bill to deal with housing. And it passed the House in July of 2009 and went over to the Senate to await further activity. The House, in the meantime, was doing some work at the committee level on H.R. 3200. It would, in fact, passed H.R. 3200 on the floor of the House in November of 2009. But H.R. 3200 has gone to the dustbin of history. No one has seen or heard from it since the day it left the House. 3590 was the vehicle by which Harry Reid created a health care law that was done by very devious circumstances. If you read the history, you go to Thomas, the Library of Congress website, and read the history of H.R. 3590, the history is it passed the House, went over to the Senate, and was amended. Straightforward process, but the amendment read, strike all after the enacting clause and insert, and what was inserted was the health care language, which was developed not by senators, but by staff in the Senate Finance Committee, and this is then what passed for the Senate version of a health care law. The Senate didn't take up H.R. 3200, they passed a new bill, 3590. 3590 then passes the Senate. Sure, it should come back to the House. Sure, we should have a conference committee, but then the unthinkable happened, and a Massachusetts Senate seat turned Republican after the passage of H.R. 3590 on Christmas Eve of 2009. When the new senator from Massachusetts was seated, no longer did the Senate have the 60 votes to break a filibuster. Majority Leader Reid said, I've done everything I can with this. I can't do anything more. It's up to the House then to take up this bill and pass it. And bear in mind, since the House had passed the bill as a housing bill in July, all that was required for this thing to become law was for the House to take it up. How many are in agreement with the Senate amendment to H.R. 3590? As many as in agreement say aye. If it's over 218, the thing goes down to the White House. And that's exactly what happened without a single Republican vote in the Senate or the House. A major piece of legislation. So when I call it an error, when I call it a mistake, I mean that quite literally. This was the dog ate my homework, and I turned in the rough draft. And the rough draft became law. So is it any wonder then that we struggle with the effects of this law now 3 years and 3 weeks later? And the answer should be no surprise. The problem is the long-suffering American people who are having to deal with this, who even this week are looking at data from insurance companies about how dramatically premiums will increase over the next year. The long-suffering American people are the ones who are the recipients of this very bad process and this very flawed law. So we have an opportunity this week to fix that, to begin to roll back this process, to reject the rough draft that accidentally got signed into law and send things back to the committees and do the work that we all thought should have been done in the first place. Look, make no mistake about it. this law is never going to do the things that were promised. Now, we're all used to politicians making promises and those promises not being fulfilled. Things like, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. Turns out, those statements are no longer operational. In fact, if you like your doctor, you'd better get used to something else, or if you like your health plan, you better be ready to pay up because it's going to cost a lot more if you decide to keep that. But what about things like transparency? What about the open and honest government that we were promised back in the campaign of 2008? Where is that? Is it any wonder that this thing has been so hard when all of the premise was that the states would participate in setting up exchanges, the states would participate in Medicaid expansion. That, after all, was the intent of the law that was passed and signed. And why didn't that happen? Well, where were the governors when this thing was crafted? Where were the governors in July of 2009 when all of the special interests descended upon the White House to write this thing behind closed doors? My God, you look at the documents we received at Energy and Commerce, they didn't even want House Democrats in the room. They wanted to write the thing the way they wanted it. So the special interests were down at the White House. They wrote the law. The governors were nowhere to be seen. So the governors are trying their best to figure out what in the world this means to them. Well, all during last fall's campaign, there were some pending rules that were held by the Department of Health and Human Services and not revealed until after Election Day. What am I talking about? Well, how about the essential health benefit rule? Every governor who then says, well, okay, I'll accept the exchange and run it as a state exchange, needs to know, what are they going to be required to cover? What is it going to cost them? Well, the rule for the essential health benefits was held until November 8th, 2 days after Election Day. That's awfully convenient. So they had a week to make up their minds whether or not they're going to participate. Well, it's no great surprise that most of them said, I can't do it. They were given an extension, but that was during the holidays, and they were given another month extension after that. But still, the die had been cast, and only 18 out of the 50 states and the District of Columbia decided to participate. 26 states said, no dice. You do it, federal government. We're not setting this up on our own. And then you've got 6 states that are going to do some type of hybrid, but they will not be ready on October 1st when this thing is supposed to go live and everybody can go up and sign up for the Elysian Fields of Obamacare on the Internet. It's not likely to be ready at the state level, and I got a secret for you. It's not going to be ready at the federal level. Why do I say that? Because every principle that's involved in the genesis of this thing, when they speak to outside groups, talks about contingency plans. They talk about narrowing the scope. When they come to committee, will they talk about contingency plans? No, they will not. I, for one, do not understand what the reluctance is. If you want the House to help you, you have to at least be honest and admit that you have a problem before we can even begin to help. This is the sad state we find ourselves in today. The exchanges are not likely to be ready in time. The federal hub, the information hub, is under extreme duress even as we speak. And, yeah, this very week we find out that the Secretary of Health and Human Services is walking around town with a cup asking the industries that she regulates for dollars to implement the Affordable Care Act because those dreadful obstructionist Republicans are not giving us the billions and billions of dollars that we need. Well, I got to tell you what, Mr. Chairman, I think we get to next fall and the curtain is pulled back on this thing and people begin to realize just how bad it is and how futile it has been to set this up under the circumstances that they created for themselves. It's going to collapse of its own weight. The cynic in me would say that perhaps the administration planned this all along. There were plenty of people on our committee, and in fact, the president himself, when he was a candidate back in 2008, said, I prefer a single-payer system, but you kind of got to get there from here. Maybe getting there from here involved creating a system that was designed to collapse, and in fact, that is exactly what's in process right now. We've got a chance to save the American people. It starts with repealing this thing. That happens on Thursday, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak on the rule.
Appreciate the gentleman's testimony. The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, is recognized, representing the Committee on Energy and Commerce.
Well, I am more than happy to go point by point, but I will resist that. But one quote that Dr. Burgess said, long-suffering Americans will be saved from this. Really? I really challenge the Republicans who support this repeal to go out and explain to the 3.1 million young adults who have gained insurance through their parents' plan that their long suffering will be ended if they get kicked off of their parents' plans. Or the 6.1 million people with Medicare through 2012 that received $5.7 billion in a prescription drug discount. Forget closing the donut hole. That's all over. Or the 34 million people with Medicare who received free preventive services, 71 million privately insured people who gained improved coverage for their preventive services, or the 105 million Americans who had lifetime limits removed from their insurance, people with hemophilia, people who have a child that is born as Olivia was, who suffered a stroke at birth. She's hemiplegic. You can tell me how to pronounce that. I don't know. Was that right? Epilepsy, cognitive delays, cerebral palsy, and prior to the law prohibiting discrimination against children under age 19 with pre-existing conditions, each time Olivia's parents switched jobs, they had to fight for the needed coverage. They were long-suffering Americans then. They aren't any longer. It's also true that the slowest sustained national health spending growth in 50 years has occurred, with low growth continuing in 2012 for Medicare and Medicaid, and actually between 2011 and 2012, for the first time, costs actually declined in Medicaid. $2.1 billion has been returned to consumers through the medical loss ratio, saying that health insurance companies now have to spend 80% at least of their the premium dollar on health care. And so rebates and rate review occurred. The percent of double-digit rate increases in health insurance premiums fell from 75% in 2010 to 14% so far in 2003. The kind of rate review that has been put into Obamacare, which I say with pride, has actually reduced that. And, you know, I could go over the so-called study that was done on large premium increases, which is completely false, doesn't take into account many of the changes. $4.2 billion was recovered in 2012 from anti-fraud efforts, a record high, for a total of nearly $15 billion recovered over the last 4 years, double that of the previous four years. So we have seen enormous accomplishments already for millions and millions of Americans, and that is just the beginning. And women have the most to gain. Women who have been the victims of rate discrimination, 48% more for our health care over our lifetime. Now, gender discrimination is now ended. Let me just talk 1 minute about Margaret, who, because of her doctor was able to detect very early breast cancer from the mammogram performed during her now allowed Medicare wellness visit, is actually going to get the kind of services that she needs. But it's not just anecdotal. We are talking in each one of these improvements millions and millions of people. So the Repeal Act would eliminate these valuable benefits and protections to the tens of millions of Americans. I want to say one other thing. You talked about the process and the so-called accidental. I was here for the process on Medicare Part D. And if you want to talk about something messy, you were here up till 3 in the morning on this legislation. The pharmaceutical companies writing in that Medicare cannot negotiate for lower prices as the Veterans Administration does. Many of the Democrats opposed the legislation. But once it passed, we worked day and night in our districts to make it work, because that was the law, so that we could help seniors pick the right plan and get on that. And I have to tell you, the very idea that a law that was passed, that has now been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States of America, that has been challenged and is the law of the land, that we would find this kind of relentless 37 votes, now calling another vote so your freshmen can say, oh, I didn't vote for this. In fact, I had a chance to vote against it. It seems to me that we all should be digging in and making sure that 25 million Americans are going to be able to get the health care that they need. Mr. Chairman, I am happy to answer the many questions about the many myths that exist about Obamacare, and I will yield back my time.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank my colleagues for the long hours you put in this process. You make the House function. We're very grateful for that. I've heard from Dr. Burgess and others the story of how the bill was passed and the procedure. I think Ms. Schakowsky answered it quite succinctly. The many critics of this law who doubt its legality or constitutionality literally had their day in court. Literally. The United States Supreme Court decided last June that the law is legal and constitutional. Certainly any procedural defects would have been addressed in that litigation. They were not. The court has spoken, and we are now speaking for the 37th time on this issue. I respect the majority's right to bring any bill to the floor as often as it chooses. That's their prerogative. But I would like those who intend to support the repeal to think about the impact a repeal would have on the people we are here to represent. The impact on a 23-year-old young woman or young man who is pursuing their studies, who's working part-time, who's looking for their first opportunity in life, and who is insured today because he or she can stay on their parents' health insurance policy. What would you do for that person when you repeal this bill? I'd like you to think about the senior citizen, person with a disability, who under the Part D law, the Medicare Part D prescription law that was enacted that Ms. Schakowsky made reference to, would very often run out of coverage by Labor Day because of the so-called donut hole. If they had prescription bills of maybe $60 or $70 a week, the first part of the year, they would pay 25% of the cost of the prescription. Medicare would pay 75% of the cost of the prescription. But on Labor Day, the coverage would run out completely, and they'd have to pay 100% of their coverage in all likelihood for the rest of the year. People in that situation have had that gap closed by at least half. In effect, it has extended their coverage well into the year, and by the year 2018, the gap will no longer exist, and for the entire year, they will have full prescription drug coverage. Those of you who support repeal, what would you do to help that person? Think about the person, the family that has an 11-year-old daughter who has juvenile diabetes. And the parents decide they're going to leave their jobs and start a business, start a company, pursue their life's dream, and they go to buy health insurance for their family, and they find out, lo and behold, under the old law, they can't get insured because their daughter has juvenile diabetes. She has a pre-existing condition. Or they find out they can get insured, but it's going to cost 3 times what it would cost for the family whose child doesn't have a pre-existing condition. Under the new law, that child can get covered at the same rate that your son or daughter or my son or daughter could get covered at who doesn't have a pre-existing condition. What would you do to help that family? Now, there's been 37 votes on repeal. There's been 0 votes on replace. When the law was first enacted, the majority party ran on a platform, espoused a platform of repeal and replace. We've had repeal times 37. We've had 0 on replacement. Most recently, the issue arose of the problem that adults who have a pre-existing condition, who are eligible to be covered by a high-risk pool,
we're facing a problem because the high-risk pool was insufficiently funded. The majority leader of your party worked on a bill that would have addressed that problem. You didn't bring it to the floor. Didn't put it to a vote. That is the sum total of your replacement effort for the last 3 years and some months since the bill was passed. We will have our political back and forth this week as we do. We'll have it this afternoon. It's democracy. It's welcome. But there are real people with real problems who really benefit from this law. To those who support repeal, I say the challenge before you is to say what you would do instead when you repeal this law. I yield back.
The gentleman, my friend from the state of Washington, Dr. McDermott, is recognized. If you could please make sure that's turned on. Perhaps it is.
I got a voice that's
Thank you very much.
got so gravelly that I come from a state where we elected a former member of Congress to be governor, and he's implemented the law, and the exchange is up and running, and the insurance policies offered by the insurance industry are below what they were last year. We're ready to go in the state of Washington. Now, Texas may have a problem, I understand, but you got a governor who's got his own ideas. If this were January the 19th of 2011, which was our very first vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act, I would be arguing on behalf of the 17 million kids with pre-existing conditions who have been insured coverage by this bill. If it were February of 2011, when we voted to stop all funding, and it was our 15th vote against Obamacare, I might tell you about the 360,000 small businesses that are taking advantage of the tax credit and providing insurance for 2 million workers. And if this were July 2012, just a few months ago, on our 33rd vote to get rid of the ACA, I might ask you to think about the 13 million Americans who are about to receive billions with a B, in rebates from their insurance company's excessive administrative costs. But today, at this kind of unbelievable 37th vote, I mean, I've done a lot of things in 40 years of being in legislative bodies, but nothing like this. We voted on this thing practically once a month since it was enacted. And we're voting to get rid of a set of benefits that most Americans, even Republicans, support. And I'm not going to dignify this complete and utter waste of congressional time and taxpayer money with any logical reason. My colleagues have laid all that stuff out, and it's fine, but it's to no avail. I know what the game is. This place ain't on the level. It's pretty clear there's no logic or reason to this bill. Proponents don't care about the beneficiaries or the fiscal savings. I talked to Bill Frist about a year ago, and we had a long conversation, and he said, instead of repealing, what we should do is just fix it. I mean, Bill Frist was the majority leader in the United States Senate. Now we got another bunch in there now, and it's different. But no one in this room believes. There isn't a single soul in here who believes it's going to pass the Senate or that President Obama is going to sign it. I'm going to tell the world what the secret is. This is a vote about votes. Even the Speaker admits that this is a box to check on the next cycle's freshman campaign literature. And Mo Udall, who used to serve here, once said in one of these hearings, well, everything that needs to be said has been said about this, but unfortunately not everybody's had a chance to say it yet. And that's really what's going on here today. Don't let the sequestration that's hitting our poor and seniors hardest, or the 22 veterans who kill themselves every day, or an anemic economy, don't let those things stand in the way of this circus. Don't let the fact that the ACA will be implemented with or without you, and that it's going to take real work to make it help the millions of Americans it's intended to benefit. Don't let this stop. I mean, we'll have this vote tomorrow, and everybody will go out and send out their press release. What they're going to do is actually they're going to pass the bill all the way up to passing the actual vote. They're going to save the vote till Friday, because they want to do Friday when they can put out the press release as they go home for the weekend. I mean, I understand what's going on here. The freshmen are going to let the world know that they, too, like their elders in the Republican caucus, want to be known for getting nothing done. That's really what this is all about. They want to be able to say, I voted against it. They've got to have a chance before we go on here, and that's what we're doing here. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all four of you being here, not only available for the testimony, but for the testimony that you provided. Mrs. Schakowsky, the first question would be to you from myself, and that is, haven't we already seen rationing take place with this Obamacare, which is what we knew that would happen with the risk pool problem?
I'm really glad you mentioned the question of rationing, because right now in the United States of America, we ration health care, and the ration card is the dollar bill. And because of the rationing that we do, 30 million Americans are not able to get coverage. And I think anybody can look at the way we ration health care and understand that if you are poor, you can't get the same access to health care. Is it any wonder that people who are in the upper half of the income live longer, and people who are in the lower half live less, have a shorter life, and that women, poor women, have actually lost longevity? It's the most cynical kind of rationing that we do. And I would say that what Obamacare is all about is ending that kind of rationing by the dollar bill. Those people who are looking to get into the short-term pre-existing care pool, as soon as we implement, with no help from the Republicans, as soon as we implement Obamacare, all of those people will be able to get the health care that they need.
Dr. Burgess, probably the Senate Finance Chairman was not talking off of a Republican talking point. I think he writes his own, but he said after voting for the bill and sponsoring it and working through the Senate, this is going to be a train wreck. Why did Senator Baucus say that? What does he know that we evidently can't figure out on this side?
Well, he sees exactly the same as any one of us who have studied this over time, and the type of testimony we get from the agencies in our committees. He's seeing the same thing that we're seeing on the House side. They're not ready. They won't be ready. They're not ready because they thought the states would participate to a greater degree. I explained why the states didn't. Their governors felt that they were not included in the process as it was created. Then they hid the ball during the election process. And now, as we get into the 2013, which is supposed to be the implementation year, nothing seems to be working as intended. The funding for the implementation is being cobbled together from all sorts of sources. Yeah, I was in favor of extending the pre-existing program. I was in favor of taking that money from the prevention fund and using it for its intended purpose. I regret that we didn't bring that bill to the floor, but I think there's a good chance that we'll see it again before Memorial Day. But the larger purpose to be served there was, let's not allow more money to be squandered for the types of things that the Secretary was expending money on. Let's actually take care of the people that we've already promised. We've already obligated ourselves to take care of them. We heard compelling testimony in committee. Unfortunately, not many people attended that day, but the young woman from Tennessee who had been diagnosed with lymphoma, who had been attempting to age into the pre-existing pool because, she's got to go uninsured for 6 months in order to qualify for the federal pre-existing pool. So she went from October and had her sights set on getting into that program, was maxing out her credit cards for her treatments and trying to scrape together the cash so that she wouldn't lose ground in the treatment of her illness. And then on February 1st, she's told, sorry, sister, we're closed for business. We need this money for implementation of Obamacare because we didn't adequately plan for it. So that individual is left out in the cold. By January 1st, there may be another option for her if she's still around, and that is a bigger question. Kids with pre-existing, I mean, come on, don't make this worse than it is. The kids with pre-existing conditions were actually left out of the Affordable Care Act because of a drafting error. When I referenced the fact that this thing came to be law without the proper scrutiny of a conference committee, this was one of the errors that occurred. The insurance companies, those dreadful dastardly insurance companies said, yeah, okay, we understand what congressional intent was. We'll go ahead and cover those kids. But many people who remember that last week of March of 2010, when those kids with pre-existing kids were brought into insurance policies because the insurance companies stepped up and did that. Kids on their parents' insurance, we all learned right before the Supreme Court ruled when everybody under the sun thought the rug was going to be pulled out from under this thing. Insurance companies said, look, we understand people's concerns on this. This actually has turned out to be a pretty good marketing tool for us, and we're going to continue it. If the Supreme Court voids the law, we will continue that program. So it's specious to say if we overturn the law on Thursday that that's going to go away. In fact, it's not. That is, the insurance companies have recognized the value in that. And there are other things that we could go down the list. The world would change by repeal because the difficult parts of the implementation of Obamacare would now be required to come back to the committees where they belonged in the first place. This thing was not ready for prime time when it was signed into law.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm pleased that Dr. Burgess was able to be the first person on the Rules Committee to speak today instead of usually having to wait until the end.
I can't wait till I get to question myself.
He's always very eloquent when he does speak and sums things up very well. There's a lot to say about the need to repeal this bill. And I think Dr. Burgess has done a very good job of explaining that. I would like to make a couple of brief comments about some things that have been said today. It's my understanding that the CBO has just come out with a report in the last few days that said even if this bill becomes implemented fully, there will be 30 million Americans who are not covered. When the bill was being proposed, we constantly heard there were 47 million Americans who were not covered by health care. That was the mantra that was used, health care. We tore those numbers apart, and we were able to show that it was really about 9 million Americans who were not covered by health care. I don't have the numbers handy today, but within the numbers that were being touted were the 12 million illegal immigrants who are here, illegal aliens who are here, people who could be covered by insurance but have chosen not to be covered by insurance. So we got that number down to about 9 million. Now CBO is saying 30 million people aren't going to be covered even if this bill is fully implemented. So don't continue, and that's CBO. That's not us saying that. That's the Congressional Budget Office, which for better or for worse, we all have to refer to as objective. Sometimes I think they're objective, sometimes I don't think they're objective, but we realize they're dealing with what they have in front of them. I'd like to point out to my colleagues that I know that Obamacare became law while they were in the majority, but there were many things that they could have fixed relative particularly to Medicare Part D and the donut hole that they chose not to fix, that they now tout as being great under Obamacare, but they had a couple of years that they could have done that. Ms. Schakowsky said that 17 million people who have been assured coverage for pre-existing conditions. We know that fewer than 1 million people have signed up for the high-risk pools and the pre-existing conditions under this law, and that already the states had provisions for taking care of people who had pre-existing conditions. There was no need for this. And of course, what we've talked about again since the beginning is the horrible specter of the IRS being the enforcers of this law. And I don't think that we need to say too much more than to highlight the news about the IRS's unconscionable interference in imposing their liberal leanings on the laws related to tax exemption that have come out this week. And yet, our colleagues talked about how this is just not acceptable, but they want to put the implementation of our health care in the hands of the very same people. Unbelievable to me that they would be pushing this and pushing it. All the horrors that we predicted are coming true. The American people have not liked this bill since before it was passed. Fewer of them like it now. We're responding to what the American people want. We have a situation in our country where people believe that a bureaucracy at the federal level is smarter than the collective wisdom of the 320 million Americans. We didn't get to be a great country because we had a fabulous government that ran our lives from cradle to grave. We got to be a great country because we're based on freedom. And what this bill does is take away freedom from the American people. And it is high time that it is repealed. I don't care how many times we bring it up for a vote. In my opinion, there's nothing more important than repealing this bill because it erodes our freedom in a way that nothing else has ever eroded our freedom. And if you continue to advocate for this bill, then you're advocating to take away freedom from the American people. That's not what this country's all about. So I think we're doing the right thing by voting to repeal this bill again. If we do it 500 times, I hope that won't be necessary. I think it will, even if we're not successful in repealing it, I think it will collapse of its own weight. I think it will collapse because of the incompetence that's built into the law, because of the unworkability built into the law. I think Dr. Burgess is right that it's an accidental law and that it didn't go through the appropriate process. It's a really wonderful lesson for the American people in why, when you do things like this, it doesn't work. So I support the repeal, and I commend Dr. Burgess for all the work that he's done in educating people about the flaws in this legislation, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know why I supported this bill. We were up to 17 to 18% of GDP, and we could not afford the cost of health care to rise any further. It was going up so fast. And we didn't want to become a country that was just able to provide some people health care and do some more when Lindsey Graham and John McCain wanted us to hit somebody. I didn't do it because I wanted somebody to heave a brick through my window of my district office in Niagara Falls or threaten the lives of my grandchildren, but I thought it was my obligation to be here to do that. And I'm glad that CBO has just been mentioned, that they think this is going to be awful. Here's a letter from CBO to Chairman Ryan, dated today. And they say that it's not possible for them to do what they've been asked to do, but let me just read this, what I think is a very pertinent part, and I'll put all of it in the record if I may. CBO says that net savings from eliminating insurance coverage provisions of the ACA would be more than offset by the combination of other spending increases and revenue reductions that repeal of ACA would entail. On balance, CBO and JCT estimated repealing ACA would affect direct spending and revenues in ways resulting in a net increase, that's increase, in budget deficits, which is what we talk about almost daily here, right, of over $109 billion. Did you know that, Dr. Burgess? Do you not believe it? You don't believe it? Okay. Well, let's say a couple other things you're going to. I know my colleague, Ms. Schakowsky, brought it up, and it's so important what it did for women. I think the women in all of our districts would be a little nervous about this. Did you know that 8 states and the District of Columbia considered someone who's a victim of domestic violence to be a pre-existing condition, and they couldn't be insured?
You know, I don't know that that's accurate.
It
I
is.
practiced medicine for 25 years. I practiced women's health for 25 years. I cannot recall ever having come up against that situation. I had patients who were declined care for concept of pre-existing conditions. I took care of them anyway because it was the right thing to do. But you know what? Wait a minute. Since you brought up pre-existing conditions, let's talk about it.
Well, no, let me reclaim my time. I've met people in my lifetime who not only ran up against the lifetime limit of insurance in their 40s or 50s because of traumatic brain injury, which cost so much money. The insurance companies, they would reach the limit. Until the Clinton health care plan that we all debated and lost, I don't think any of us, let me speak for myself, I didn't know there was a lifetime limit and a yearly limit on how much you could spend on health care, despite how much you'd paid. But I met a woman who was born with cerebral palsy. I see this all the time, and I know you have too. Or maybe they don't come to your office because they have no insurance. This woman had just been able to get Medicare. 65 years. She had been a housewife, a mother. She had cooked and sewn and cleaned and driven cars. Everything that's an accident ready to happen. Exposed to all diseases and the frailties of human flesh. No insurance. She said for the first time in 65 years, I can enjoy my life and feel a little confident that I'm going to make it through the next day. Now, not only did women be denied insurance, but as Jan Schakowsky pointed out, 46% increase was paid for insurance by single women in this country. Did you all know that? Do you think the women in your district are going to want to go back to that? What we're doing in this bill, just changing fees from fee-for-service to outcomes, is going to save a great deal of money and provide better health care. Because despite the fact that we spend so much of our GDP on health care, we don't have the best health care in the world. Outcomes in other countries are far better than ours, and we want to achieve what they've got. We want to do away with all the excess tests that cost so much. And we've got great promises of things that are going to happen. But now I do understand that your freshmen want to vote to repeal this. How would they feel about if they had a chance to vote on some legislation to stop the sequester? Would they like to do that? Well, I wish you would. I wish you'd ask them if they'd like to do that, or maybe vote on a job creation bill, because we haven't seen one in 2.5 years. And that's something people...
That actually is not accurate.
But, you know, if you want to keep voting on it, as Mr. Andrews said, it's perfectly your prerogative to do that. But one organization reported that you spent $52.4 million of taxpayer money trying to do it. In these hard times, I mean, that's going to be a little hard to explain. And with the repeal, again, you'll spend another $1.45 million putting politics before the health of the nation. I really, I've talked about this forever. It worries me that every week I come back here and we do one-house bills and we know they're not going anywhere. But why we want to do that, I don't know. But you want to do this, you're in charge. You can do it. But the idea first, one thing that I hear all the time is that this was written in a back room by some strangers. This went through committees, every last one of them, with Republicans on those committees in attendance, making amendments that were accepted. They're in this bill.
And that language never saw the light of day.
I know that the whole bill.
The language that we had before us in the Affordable Care Act was the language that was developed down at the White House with the 6 special interest groups and then created through the Senate Finance Committee.
Let me tell you, the Democrat caucus, I don't know, I know you all weren't interested in it. We went over that bill 3 times line by line. We went over that bill. And I know that the committee process went on, and that everybody was free to ask, and a lot of experts were consulted. I don't think there's any question about that. But it had full committee work here. And we, of course, we talk about conference. When I was here, we couldn't get a conference. The Republicans in the Senate wouldn't allow it, and we had to come up with something called ping-ponging so that we could try to get some legislation cobbled together between the two houses so the president could sign it. It seems to me that in the last few years here, all we've done is really not to try to move the United States forward, but to keep it neutral, if not reverse. And I'm really concerned about that. Mr. Andrews, you wanted to speak.
I wanted to comment on your point about the conference and the great love for procedural regular order.
Yeah.
The House passed a budget resolution this year. By the way, the budget resolution assumed every dollar of savings and revenues from Obamacare as part of the budget. I'll say that again. That the budget Mr. Ryan wrote kept all the Medicare and Medicaid spending changes, restraints, and all the revenue. The House passed a budget, the Senate passed a budget, and the House has refused to appoint conferees. So we could be having a conference, which you all love so much, we could be having a conference on the budget. Yesterday, Senator McCain said it was insane not to go to conference on the budget. So here we are trying to repeal this law for the 37th time, but we won't have the majority go into a conference on the budget. But I want to say one other thing to my friend, that my friend Dr. Burgess's reference about the young lady who testified at the Energy and Commerce Committee hearing, it's absolutely, this hearing is really about her. And I agree with him that we have a mutual obligation to come up with some solution for her right now as she ages out of the system, but understand the effect of repeal on that witness. If this law is repealed, when she does age out, when she's an adult, she will not be protected against discrimination based upon her pre-existing condition because there is no law at the federal level that bars it. There's maybe lucky to live in some states where there is, but the gentleman knows, the physician knows, that ERISA plans are not subject to that law, interstate plans are not subject to that law. So this witness, I agree with you that we want to try to help. What are you doing for her?
Under current law,
I'd be happy to yield to him, Dr. Burgess.
in the large group market, there are open enrollment periods in large group plans. That is why the pre-existing condition problem that was sold as such an enormous problem when Obamacare was passed, 8 to 12 to 15 million people we heard repeatedly, and how many people signed up for the PSIP program? 62,000 when the Supreme Court ruled, 100,000 by the end of the year with a maximum effort to get, on the part of HHS, to get people to sign up. This was a manageable problem had we decided to manage it. And look, back in 2009, and everybody remembers all the tension in the country as this thing was being discussed, but what were people telling us in those town halls? They were saying, don't mess up the system that is working for most of us, and if you're going to do anything at all, help us with costs. Well, what have we done? We've messed up the system that was working for most people, and we have destroyed the cost structure.
But Dr. Burgess, it wasn't. Mr. Andrews?
The other thing I would like to comment on the gentlelady's point about the Congressional Budget Office. We've heard the schizophrenia here just in the last 20 minutes on this. That my friend from North Carolina approvingly cited a study from the CBO about the number of people who will enroll. I would point out what that study says is that rates of enrollment are predicted to be quite slow under this law. And if one can see what the reason is for that, because the funding that would make people aware of the opportunity to enroll and set up the infrastructure has been choked off by the majority here, so there's going to be slow enrollment. That report does not say that there are 30 million people who are not eligible to enroll in health insurance. It most emphatically does not say that. But the gentlelady approvingly cites it. Then my friend from New York asks my friend from Texas about the CBO report which says that repealing this law adds over $100 billion to the deficit. And he says he doesn't believe it. Now, when we're going to have a debate like this and we have a referee, the referee either has to have authority all the time or none of the time. And I would be perfectly willing to accept my friend from North Carolina's point that there is a report that talks about 30 million not being enrolled right away, by the way. Okay, that's their opinion. We live by those rules. But we can't we can't say the CBO, the referee is right when we agree with him, and the referee's wrong when we disagree with him. Now, the CBO has said quite emphatically, repealing this law will add over $100 billion to the deficit. They say the number may be a little more, a little less now because they weren't given the opportunity to do that scoring this time. Let me just make that one more point. The majority professes its love for proceeding only when all the ducks are in a row and the facts are in order. Can any member of the majority tell me with certainty what the CBO would say the cost of this repeal would be the deficit? I think you can't because there is no score. At the very least, I think the majority should wait to take this vote until they know what CBO says about its impact on the deficit.
Let me say something, too, about the exchanges. It's interesting. 26 states are not going to do it. That's one more than half. And the federal government will do it, and we're paying for it anyway in the states that are doing it. First 3 years, isn't that right? The cost of the exchanges will be picked up.
No, the exchanges will endure in perpetuity. The Medicaid is for 3 years.
Right. I believe in those states that don't do it, that people eligible for that kind of insurance and aren't going to be able to get it are not going to be very happy about that. And frankly, this may speed us faster than we would have thought towards single payer. And that's a very interesting thought for me and one I cherish and like to hold close. So does anybody else need to comment on anything I've said? I want to give everybody a chance.
May I just make the statement on the Congressional Budget Office? The reason I am distrustful of their figure is because this is the very same Congressional Budget Office that told us when this law was first debated and passed in 2010 that it would return $142 billion in deficit reduction. Nobody believes that fantasy any longer.
May I comment on that? It's actually more now.
It's actually
more now. The gentleman's right. The CBO was wrong about the Affordable Care Act in March of 2010. They projected that the changes in Medicare and Medicaid would save $719 billion over 10 years. Yesterday, they revised that to say it would save a little over $1 trillion over 10 years in spending restraint. So did you read yesterday's report?
Yeah, but the total price tag is $1.8 trillion over the next 10 years. That's in deficit. That is not returning money to the federal treasury.
If I may, the letter that they issued, I believe, yesterday said they didn't have enough time to score this, which they should be given time. But they concluded it was very likely that the numbers would be about what they were last February when they last did this, which said that repeal would cost would cost over $100 billion added to the deficit.
And they did comment that they were so busy trying to get a budget that they really couldn't work with this. Mr. McDermott?
Well, I was just going to say, Ms. Slaughter, that listening to Dr. Burgess is a little like deja vu all over again. I went to medical school in 1963. I graduated, which is when Medicare was just about to come on the scene. The president of the American Medical Association at that time was a man named Edward Annis. He went all over Chicago, where I went to medical school, saying that this is the end of American medicine. There will be, American medicine is dead. Socialism, oh God, it's going to be the worst thing that ever happened. The medical profession has made out like bandits on the back of Medicare since 1964. And when when Dr. Burgess sits here and tells me this is the end and it's going to be, it's a terrible thing and the end of medicine again, I think, well, let's just come back here in about 50 years and have a look. The American people knew that was wrong then, and they adopted Medicare, and it became the law of the land, and it has taken care of millions and millions and millions of people who didn't have health care. We're going to do the same thing again here, starting on October 1.
Social Security had the same kind of debate in the Congress as well, and it has lifted so many seniors out of poverty. It's really great. Well, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. The gentlewoman, ranking member, yields back her time. To answer the question from the gentleman, yes, there's one member of the majority party that will tell you that we can give you an answer and could. I did not come prepared with it today. But I will tell you that by taking away over $1 trillion worth of tax increases And 25, if you add in the 25 million people who are unemployed and underemployed, and the millions of people who cannot find work, and lost generations of people who cannot pay back their student loans because they cannot find a job, there is a tremendous need for us to understand why this debate is alive and well in Washington today. It is no mistake. I will in just a second. I'm trying to respond back to a question from the gentleman who's asking if one Republican would stand up. One will. And many will stand up and tell you that we believe that in aggregate our country is weaker, will be weak as we move forward. And if it is as poorly run as Medicare and Social Security, which is non-sustainable because we cannot make it pay for itself, then we are in trouble. And I think that is where we are headed.
Mr. Chairman.
I was going to offer, I'm not trying to engage in a debate, I'm trying to answer a question.
Would you yield?
I've not yielded myself such time. I'm simply responding back to the gentleman on a question, and I will simply say that we are here today for the debate that is alive and well in the United States of America, and there are at least a few Republicans who will stand up and answer that question. Gentleman, Chairman Cole is recognized.
First, I apologize for missing. I got most of your presentations, but then had to leave. I had constituents outside, but the gentleman from New Jersey's point, I have heard this 37 times before, so I think I'm pretty well versed in your positions. And I just want to make a couple of quick comments and a couple of disagreements. And with my friend from New Jersey, he's correct when he makes the point that we've talked about this long and hard and voted. But we actually have passed something like 7 or 8 different bills that have changed this. And people seem to forget that everything from the elimination of 1040s, the Class Act, there's actually, I have a list. I actually put them together in preparation for town hall meetings in a couple of weeks, because I'd like to say not only voted against it, but here's areas where, and most of those changes have been bipartisan, not all of them, but they've happened. So I don't think there's an effort not to continue to work away. And the one that you made reference to, Leader Cantor's bill, I can tell you firsthand, they're still working on that. I mean, they're trying to make some changes and come back, and frankly, that's one where I would hope that I wish the administration were working with us, because they clearly got it wrong. You can't. This isn't an I obviously have an overall judgment of the bill, but you can't write a 2,000-something page bill and not make mistakes. So the idea that, and I try to tell my friends on my side of the aisle, you're probably not going to repeal something called Obamacare while a guy named Obama is president of the United States. I think that's just kind of, hard to avoid that reality. But I'm going to disagree, too, with my friend from Illinois, because I don't think this is like the prescription drug program. First of all, that was popular, period. It really was popular. And this bill has never been popular. We can argue over the merits of the bill. I think that's a fair argument to have, but you can't argue that it's ever been popular with the American people. It just simply, there's not a poll out there, nor has it become progressively more popular as it's been, phased in. That's just not the case, and that's really the root of the political problem. I think what happened with prescription drugs, first of all, the basic approach worked. I mean, it's one of the few health care programs we've ever had that what's come in something like 41% less than the costs were estimated. So this is different, and it may turn out the way you think. I mean, I don't think we know that. But this is a very different piece of legislation. And again, to my friends, this is not Medicare and Social Security. Those things both passed with huge bipartisan votes, with significant, they did. Go back and look at the votes. With lots of people supporting. Now, was there lots of opposition? Sure. But there was some support. This stuff, let me finish my point, and I certainly will. I certainly yield to my friend. This fight's going to go on for a long time, and because I think the process, and look, we're all adults, and I actually agree very much with your comments about the process on the passage, although I would argue that I think there was also a decision made on the other side in the prescription drug bill, is that we don't want Bush to get credit for anything because this is going to change things. Some of this was politically driven, and that happens, by the way, on our side too. We're all made of the same clay here, so I've seen it on both sides of the aisle. But having said all that, I mean, I think we're going to have this debate for a while. It is true that a lot of our freshman class want to have the opportunity to vote no. I suspect some of yours want to have the opportunity to vote yes. I mean, and that it sort of works both ways, but the debate's going to continue. But in the meantime, back to a point, after we have this, I want to go back to a point, again, my friend from New Jersey made, and say, I think you're right. I think we need to find ways to try, I would argue, mitigate or change, or where you can find common ground and we can get something done, which we have done now on 7 or 8 occasions. We should continue that. But we probably have to have this discussion first, fairly or unfairly, and then hopefully we can get back to that. But I do think it's going to continue to be an issue because the implementation is so sweeping and so vast. And again, for whatever reasons, we debate that, this didn't pass on a bipartisan majority, and it just never had that kind of popularity. The other, programs have, and maybe in time this will, I don't know, but it certainly doesn't today. I certainly yield my friend from that.
I was just going to say that Medicare probably would not have become the law today. It passed the Senate 55 to 45, and today it takes 60 votes to get anything done. That's all, just a little.
I think that's a fair point, and that's probably something there's bipartisan agreement with in this chamber, is that we would like to see the Senate work a lot differently than it does. We have our fights, and I understand what the framers intended, but we get things done in this House. I actually had an argument on a television show, of all things, it's an MSNBC show, a couple of days ago, and the commentator was saying, well, Congress never gets anything. I haven't got anything done for 5 years. I said, I can't believe on this show you're saying that. I mean, last 5 years, health care passed, Dodd-Frank passed, I didn't agree with any of those things, but they're pretty big deals. And by the way, since January around here, fiscal cliff got done, VAWA got done, the Hurricane Sandy relief got voted through. We got a CR deal done on a bipartisan basis. Nobody really likes a lot of it, but it's done. We didn't shut down the government at the end of March. So sooner or later, the institution works. And this House, I think, actually works pretty well. I do think we got some problems in the Senate. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit too reflective and off the course here, but appreciate your testimony, appreciated the debate, because you're all great members and you're all passionate about what you believe, quite frankly, and each one of you always bring a great deal to the table whenever you get up on the floor to speak or come to committee. So thanks for doing it again today. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Cole yields back his time. Mr. Polis?
Thank you, gentlemen. And, the gentleman, talked about how it's unlikely to repeal Obamacare with, Obama in the White House. I know this Health Care Affordable Care Act is also known as Romney Care, as after the implementation in Massachusetts, or Gingrich Care, who's one of the intellectual authors of this concept. I think many of the tenets of, Romney Care, Obamacare, Gingrich Care have strong support on both sides of the aisle. It's a matter of fine-tuning it and making it work. We have representation from all the committees of jurisdiction here, and I have questions for each of them. First, my colleague on Education and Labor, Mr. Andrews, was there a markup of this bill in Education and Labor?
No.
Okay, because I serve on that committee, and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss that, because I don't recall that as well. We have Mr. McDermott from Ways and Means. Was there a markup of this bill in Ways and Means? And from Energy and Commerce, Ms. Schakowsky, was there a markup of this bill in Energy and Commerce?
Well, we certainly had extensive hearings on the legislation and a markup. And
no, on this bill before us today, was there a markup in your committee?
You're talking about
this bill HR 45.
To repeal. I'm back at the no.
Your committee did spend several days marking up the original bill.
We sure did.
Several days. And I recall that as well.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that because we went till, Mr. Andrews, was it 6 in the morning or something? I all through the night. Do you recall?
It was about a 26-hour markup.
26-hour markup. Energy and Commerce was several days.
Days.
If I may,
yes.
actually the chairman recessed us for 7 of those days because he didn't have the votes to get some of the amendments, or to stop some of the amendments he was trying to stop. So there was, while it looked like a long period of time, it actually, we were in limbo for a good.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So why wasn't this bill even brought to these committees and have members on both sides of the aisle the chance to offer amendments? I mean, not only wasn't it recessed for 7 days, it seems like you bypassed regular order, and this is the only committee rules here now that's even seeing this bill. Why didn't it come through the regular committee process on any of the 3 committees?
There's virtually nothing else we do in the Committee on Energy and Commerce but talk about the problems inherent in this bill.
And yet there was no time to have a markup on it?
Law.
I mean, if it's that important, shouldn't your committee do a markup on this bill? I mean, why bypass your committee and come right to rules?
I have no problem with us doing a markup in committee. It was important to get this done and get it to the floor so we can get on with some other things. So I assumed it was a decision made by leadership to expedite it.
Well, and it seems like it's at odds here. I mean, I heard Ms. Fox earlier, talk about, despite the fact that we had many days of markups in these various committees, it wasn't enough time, I guess, to satisfy her. I understand that. But here, again, the only committee is our committee here. The only time is, a couple hours we're spending on it. If it truly is of this magnitude to our economy and country, it seems like the committees of jurisdiction should at least have the opportunity for members on both sides of the aisle to amend it. Mr. Andrews?
I appreciate my friend from Colorado, and I would echo, not only were there no markups and amendments offered, but no one in this room knows the impact of this bill on the deficit. Now, my friend, the chairman, I thought gave a very articulate and sincere statement of his belief as to what the benefits of the bill are, and I understand that. My question, of course, though, was what's the score that the Congressional Budget Office has given to repeal, and no one knows because they weren't given an opportunity to do so. So this is a bill that, by definition, has an impact on the deficit of at least tens of billions of dollars, perhaps more than that, and the House is prepared to vote on this on Friday with no one knowing its impact on the deficit. Now, what I find curious about this is that the helium bill, which we devoted 2 days to a few weeks ago, could not proceed until it was scored, which I agree with. The members had an opportunity to know whether the helium bill would lift or not lift the deficit. And we had the physics properly in order for that. But this bill, which, as Mr. Cole said, has sweeping implications for many institutions in society, we're rushing ahead without having a score on it. I think that that's very ill-considered. I can't think of a major piece of legislation in the last 3 decades that did not have a score attached to it when it reached the floor. The fiscal cliff tax bill on New Year's, we certainly knew what it was going to cost. The Medicare Part D, we knew it was going to cost. The welfare reform bill, we knew it was going to cost. It is a common practice here, has been since 1974, that Congress does not consider any piece of legislation except ceremonial pieces of legislation where we don't know the cost. But this one, for some reason, is an exception.
Yeah, and it seems to me shocking that there are critics of apparently when my party's are the majority, spending 9 or 10 months on this wasn't enough, and going through 3 committees of jurisdiction wasn't enough, and yet here somehow it's enough not even to know the cost or scoring of a bill and to bypass all 3 committees of jurisdiction and to come right to Rules Committee. It seems like a double standard on this one, to put things mildly. I mean, there was a process, and I understand people might have wanted a different process or more time in the process with regard to how it was crafted. I certainly remember that process. It took many, many months. And here we were seeing a committee for the bill for the very first time here in the committee. I hope that, Mr. Burgess and Mr. Chair, since this bill did not have the opportunity to be marked up in any committee of jurisdiction, I hope that we give members of the House the ability in an open rule to amend this bill. It'll be the only opportunity that Republicans or Democrats have to actually improve and build upon this bill. since it didn't have any markups in committee. And I hope that we can agree that an open rule would finally give members of both parties the opportunity to come forward with ways to improve this bill. And if somebody does make that motion, I hope the chair will join me in supporting an open rule. I know Ms. Slaughter mentioned she might have some ideas as well on this, so I hope that we can do that. I want to thank our witnesses for their time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair will yield himself 1 minute. For the record, I'd like to thank the gentleman for his questions and statements today. I think for the record, it would be fair to say that the gentleman, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and former Governor of Massachusetts they were opposing this bill and would be for its complete repeal. For us to try and say that they might be for this or some other way simply would not, I think, be supported by public testimony.
Mr. Chair, if I can accept that. I do accept
good try.
I do accept your characterization. One could term this bill perhaps a wayward intellectual grandchild of Newt Gingrich, in that the intellectual underpinnings come from him. I understand it went in its own direction. The presidential candidate, Mitt Romney, was obviously more enthusiastic as he implemented it in his state, but I understand he had a change of heart.
I would say that it was very popular without trying to characterize him. We were going to a characterization. I would say he characterized it that it was extremely popular by the people of Massachusetts, and I do not know if that would be true. So with the offer for me to give a clarification, I thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman, Mr. Woodall, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the fact that we have a chance to vote on this bill. The very first vote I got to take as a freshman 2 years ago was voting on the repeal of this bill, as has been observed several times. That was 36 votes ago, and I still haven't succeeded at it, but I'm not a quitter, and I'm glad to know that we're going to have another chance coming up. I'll say to you, Mr. Andrews, I thought you asked the right question. You said, have you thought about how repeal would affect those that we were sent here to represent? Mr. McDermott laid out what I might say was a fairly jaded but complete examination of why folks might want to vote on this bill this week. And I would posit to all the witnesses that many of us represent districts that despise this piece of legislation. We represent districts where people are losing health care choices because of this legislation. A meeting in my office last week where a fellow said, we've already begun the process of laying off our full-time employees and moving to part-time employees. Do we want to do it? No. Are folks going to lose benefits as a result? Yes. But do we have to do it because of the President's health care bill? We do, to stay profitable, and that's the path we're going. I happen to be looking at some constituent mail here that my staff brought over. I didn't plan on having it, but a constituent from Cumming, Georgia, said, my employer just informed us all that our health care costs are going up almost 28% for the same coverage we had last year, and therefore they are exploring, quote, other options. You and I both know what that means. You are costing tens of millions of Americans their health care. Thank you very much. Sarcastically. That's real. You're concerned that folks who weren't able to stay on their parents' policies, they could have bought insurance in the private marketplace. It would have cost them money. Folks are now able to stay on their parents' policies. Is that something that I would have supported had I been here? I don't know the answer to that. Is that something America seems to have embraced and we would be able to pass in a bipartisan way today? I think it is. The elimination of lifetime caps, is that something I would be interested in voting to tell insurance companies how to do their business? I don't know the answer to that. But have insurance companies said, you know what, that adds very little to our actuarial bottom line, and sure, let's just do that because it's the right thing to do. Something we could have gotten together in a bipartisan way. I tell my constituents back home who are so angry about this bill and so anxious about the loss of choices in their life that are going to come because of it, that had we voted on this bill 6 pages at the time, I suspect we would have actually agreed on about 80% of it. It's that remaining 20% we continue to talk about, and in the same way that it is a very fair and important question to ask, how is this going to affect our constituents back home, I think it would be a mistake to dismiss the fact that this is driven entirely by our constituents back home. And the reason we keep coming back to this over and over and over again is because our constituents say you need to go back to that until you get it right. These are freshmen who have just come off an election. They are incredibly in touch with what their constituencies want back home, and what their constituencies want back home is a repeal of this legislation. They remember, as one of our previous repeal conversations in this body, my friend from New York, the ranking member, said, I don't know what all the Republican angst is about. She said, this was the compromise bill. What we really want to go to is a single-payer national health care plan, and this was the midpoint along that way you all should be satisfied. That's incredibly frightening to folks back home. And again, in the same way that your counsel that we should not be dismissive of folks who will be helped, millions of people who will have access to care that would not have before. I wish we dealt with those folks as a finite pool instead of re-regulating insurance for the entire nation in order to solve that problem. But we might not have. It might have taken this bill and the frustration that has been associated with it to bring people together to focus on those very real issues. But if you don't know someone who has been a loyal public servant on this Hill for 20 or 25 years, who's contemplating retirement in 2013 because they're going to lose their health insurance, the insurance that folks were promised they could keep if they liked it, folks are contemplating retirement because they have family members with health care needs that they do not believe will be satisfied when they get thrust into the president's health care program. Now, there is a real opportunity to come together. It's a fair question to ask a repeal and replace with what? I wish we could get through the repeal so we could have that very serious conversation about the replace. But I'd like to ask each one question. I don't think there's anyone on the panel who would tell you that they believe on January 1st, 2014, we're going to be ready to go as much as folks who supported the bill would have liked to have been ready to go on 2014. Understanding you're categorically opposed to this repeal bill today, unless your name is Dr. Burgess, in which case you're an enthusiastic supporter of repeal, would you support a postponement so that, again, we're talking, these are life and death decisions. These are folks who care about their families, need access to care for their families, and believe that care is going to disappear, not be added on January 1st, 2014. Would you support a delay of the implementation of this so we can make sure that we get it right? I'd ask you first, Mr. Andrews.
No. We've had a delay since 1965 when Congress enacted Medicare and Medicaid and left out tens of millions of people with no insurance. That's a long enough delay, in my opinion.
Ms. Schakowsky?
Absolutely not. One of the reasons being that we won't be ready because there has been reluctance on the part of some governors to actually participate in the implementation. So I think we have to work with all willing partners to make sure that we insure as many people as we can. And let me just, if I could, the 28% increase, that this is not Obamacare. As you just pointed out, Obamacare doesn't roll out until January 1st. And so the increases that you're seeing from the insurance industry, which many businesses and individuals have seen over the years, is because the insurance companies have had free rein. It's time to end that, and that's why I believe that we need to move ahead as quickly as possible with the implementation. Do I think that it's going to be flawless or without bumps in the road? There's no question. But I want to go back to the fact that while many of us did have problems with Medicare Part D, we worked our tails off to make sure, once it passed and once it was law, that it would work as smoothly as it possibly could.
Just to be clear, I think you meant to say that the exchanges don't go into effect until January 1st, 2014, but many of the mandates that are driving the increase in health care costs have already gone into effect and are continuing to go into effect.
A lot of excuses blaming Obamacare for what the insurance companies want to do.
Well, and a lot of folks denying that these cost drivers exist whatsoever. I'm sure that there's a place right in the middle that's true. Mr. McDermott, would you support the effort to slow this down to make sure that we get it done right since families' health care is on the line?
The idea was put forward first by a Republican more than 100 years ago by the name of Teddy Roosevelt. We've been delaying it and delaying it and delaying it and delaying it. And even Richard Nixon, for heaven's sakes, that liberal Republican put forward a program. People have tried to develop a way to deal with this issue. No social program has ever been created any time in the world that didn't have a few problems in it at its inception. It's impossible to anticipate every problem that will exist. There will be problems in November and December before this goes in January of 2014. But it started. And the question is whether this Congress will continue to work on it to improve it, to make it actually work for the American people. And I don't see where delay gets the American people anything. As Mrs. Slaughter pointed out, we are spending 19% of GDP in this country on health care. The French are spending 11%. Now, are the French really that much smarter than us that they can create a system that covers everyone? The Canadians spend 13%. The Germans spend 14%. Are the Germans really that much smarter than Americans? Are you saying we can't figure this out? I don't believe so. I think we will start and we will fix and we will keep fixing, as we've done Medicare. We've made numbers of amendments in the 25 years I've been in the Congress. We've made a lot of changes in Medicare, and we will make a lot of changes in the Universal Affordable Care Act. It's the nature of government in a democracy is evolutionary. You may not like that term, but evolutionary means you gradually change. Sometimes you go forward a little bit, then you come back a little bit, then you go forward, and this system is going to be fixed and improved continually until everybody is covered in this country.
Dr. Burgess is about to say 51 or more than 50% of the governors have said they don't want any part of having to implement this because they don't think it's ready to go. If folks aren't willing to delay it, it seems like repeal is the only option.
Well, I'd be in favor of a 25-year delay, and you'd have my vote for that. So please count me down for that. But let me just also say something about the cost of care in other countries. Canadians spend 13%. Their costs are on a budget. So when you get to the end of the dollar in Canada, that's the end of the health care till next year, which is why when we studied this issue leading up to the vote on the Affordable Care Act, the Canadians, they control their costs by controlling access. Do we think that our constituents in this country will accept that? It would be a pretty tough day for them to accept it. And then the other thing about the French being so much smarter than us, remember that in France they don't have the contingency fee system that we have in this country. Medical liability costs, whether you like it or not, are an enormous part of the cost burden that is borne by the healthcare system in this country. And as long as we have that unfettered contingency fee by the trial bar, it's going to continue. We are going to pay more for our care in the United States and other countries because the cost of our medical justice system is so out of whack.
I was speaking with a constituent named Barbara over the weekend. Barbara was traveling in Ireland when she had the great misfortune of getting sick. They rushed her to the hospital. She was losing a lot of blood, and she said the nurse came to her and said, "We're going to treat you as best we can here, but do not let them do any invasive surgery on you here." Barbara went through and recounted the standard of care there, the services that were available to her, the services that were not available to her. And she said, "Congressman, I know everyone keeps saying that they do it right in Europe and can't we make our system more like theirs?" But she said, "I have never been as afraid for my life as I was when I was receiving health care in the country of Ireland. Don't let us go down that road." There are lots of examples about how to get down that road. What we lack are examples about how to stay with our choice and our excellence that we have here. I appreciate both you, Dr. Burgess, and you, Dr. McDermott, for going down that path. Sadly, fewer and fewer of our young people are deciding that's a path worth going down. I think that is a discouraging sign as we have this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Show me those time. Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank this panel for being here today, but, and I'm not going to belabor this. I mean, we've, like you said, had, 37 votes, 36 votes in regards to repealing portions or all of Obamacare. Honestly, I don't care if we have 100 votes to repeal Obamacare. The issue is, and I think my friend from Georgia hit it very succinctly, when I go home, the people that I talk to, the majority of the folks in my district are opposed to this, are opposed to the government takeover of this particular issue, and particularly as it's going to affect them in the future. And when I talk to small businesses in my community, they're scared to death. And so are their employees about how this is going to affect them in the future. And so I'm concerned about those that currently have health insurance through their small business employer, that they may in fact be thrown in. A lot of these companies are saying they're just going to pay the fine to the IRS and close down their health insurance, which we know is not going to be as effective. Well, I'm sure some of you think that the federal government can do things better than the private sector. I tend to disagree with that. But end of the day, I think Dr. Burgess hit it on the head. When you look at why they can keep their costs down in other countries, it certainly is about medical malpractice. It's about the ability that those countries do to control the cost. And when you have 30+% of the procedures performed today in America as defensive medicine to keep themselves, I don't know, Dr. Burgess, if that's the right number, but that's the number that was quoted to me, about 30% of the procedures in the USA are defensive medicine costs to protect docs from getting sued. Is that about right?
The last big study I saw on this was actually done in 1996. Dr. McClellan, when he was at Stanford, and estimated the cost savings for cardiac disease in the Medicare system was $260 billion over 10 years. Well, now that was 15 years ago that was done, so I dare say the number is considerably larger now. I don't know about the percentage figure, but it is a substantial amount of money that potentially is saved if you back out the costs of so-called defensive medicine.
Last year we brought forward a piece of legislation as it related to IPAP. In particular, it also talked about tort reform as it relates to Obamacare. And we wanted to make a point that IPAB in and of itself is flawed, because that will, and maybe I'm wrong, but will lend itself towards that eliminating care, or at least substituting care for the least costly care possible. Is that, what's the fear with IPAB?
Well, as it's written, the Independent Payment Advisory Board would prescribe limits on the amount of spending within Medicare. And as a consequence, it's a, people talk about the sequester being a blunt instrument. IPAB is a pretty blunt instrument. And the difficulty that members of Congress have with that is it completely removes us from those decisions. Yes, we have we control the purse strings here in the House, but then suddenly that activity is usurped by the executive branch, and we're out of the loop on that question. That's the reason people ask me, is the Independent Payment Advisory Board, isn't that just the same as a sustainable growth rate formula? Well, under sustainable growth rate formula, Congress gets a say in that at the end of the year, and historically has undone the effects of that. We don't get a say. Well, we get a say in the Independent Payment Advisory Board, but if our cuts are not identical to what the Independent Payment Advisory Board has prescribed, and if we do not agree, House and Senate, with that, and when has that ever happened where we can't agree with the Senate, then those cuts go in just as recommended by the board to the Secretary of Health and Human Services actually has the power to institute those cuts if the House and Senate can't get together on a change. But the total number of the cuts has to remain at the level that they prescribed.
So they trump Congress. They trump Congress.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back to balance my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman, Mr. Webster is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Dr. Burgess. Just on the procedure, you were here when this bill passed. Now, the Senate version that came over, was it heard in a committee? In a substantive committee and marked up?
It was heard in the Senate Finance Committee, but my understanding it wasn't the final version that was voted on the floor. It was a hurry-up process because it was Christmas Eve, it was snowing hard, and everyone wanted to get out of town. And they had the 60 votes to get it passed.
No, I'm talking about in this body, in the House of Representatives.
In this body. When the Senate bill then came back on the ping pong prescription, no, it did not come back to our committees. There was not a hearing on it. No, I brought 18 amendments to this very table that night before it was voted on. Every one of those amendments was rejected by the Rules Committee on a 9-4 vote, as I recall, that night. What a surprise.
So the bill, when it came before the House, came as a closed rule then? Is that
we were
correct?
told it was so perfect that we could not change a single word, which is why it's so offensive now to be told I have to work on trying to improve this thing. You wouldn't let me improve it. I tried. I sat here all night with you trying to improve it. But no, it was not good enough. And the reason why was had we changed one word, then it had to go back to the Senate. And, oh, by the way, we only got 59 votes. It'll get hung up on the filibuster rule. We're going, don't check the weather. We're flying anyway.
Just wanted to clear that up. I had one other question dealing with small business. I heard at the time, and I know several instances where there were people that somewhat bought into this idea in the Senate because there was a small business provision that was included, and that small business would include, allow for choices on the exchange for small businesses. And I've heard that that's gone now. There's not going to be choices.
Well, if I may, it has been
Yes.
delayed by a year to 2015.
Well, if you can't trust the first time, can you trust the second time? Yeah, I understand that. Well, anyway, from that, so we're going to get one choice, which is sort of like a single-payer system. My little small business, I've been told that our rate is going to go up 200%. We have 60% of the people that work for us, and it's a small business, are invincibles. They're under 29 years old, and their rate is even going to be higher than that. But overall, it would be about a 200% increase. I can tell you that's tens of thousands of dollars in a business that's a small business. I mean, there's no possible way we can afford it. So I assume, and I'm going to make this assumption, see if this is correct, there were several changes made in that we have increased coverage for others. We've included people that weren't covered before, and we've also collapsed the age brackets down to about 3 brackets. And all of that, I assume, is why this insurance is going to cost more. Is that true?
I don't know if anyone actually knows the answer to that, but it seems likely, and the concept that, well, the insurance companies are just overcharging for their product, I mean, the medical loss ratio dictates that they simply cannot. So I have to, like you, I have to assume that this is because the direct cost of providing the service is, in fact, demonstrably that much higher.
Well, if there's no competition, it certainly is going to cost more for that, I guess, too. And then lastly, I have several employees that have families, and we cover the entire cost of the employee. At least my sons do. They run the business now. And as I read the explanation, if our employees take that coverage and they're covered for free, then they're going to have to get for their family, their children and their spouse coverage, and they can go to the exchange and get that coverage. However, the price supports and subsidies that come from that are not going to be available to them because that spouse who works for our business is covered fully. Is that true?
My understanding is they would not be eligible for a subsidy in the exchange if you are paying the full freight on the employee. And it has raised a question of what happens to the children. The IRS, in its wisdom, did say that those children would not be penalized if having lost their insurance from the employer because their mom or dad was covered and they were no longer eligible for a subsidy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I just wanted to make sure I understood everything that's here. This is a flawed bill, and the repeal is a good thing.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is a gentlewoman seeking time?
Yes, I am.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
I did. I just, Mr. Webster's question, if I could. It's a complicated question. I'm not suggesting Dr. Burgess is wrong, but does the business in question have more than 50 employees?
No.
Then it doesn't have to do anything.
Legally, you don't have to do anything, but morally, there are some obligations.
I understand that, but I commend you for honoring those obligations. I think it's quite honorable. But the whole premise of discussion we just had was about the burden on business. Because the business has fewer than 50 employees, the law requires it to do nothing. Now, again, if an employer wants to offer coverage, it may. Your next specific question was if I understand it correctly, if an employee is offered free coverage for himself or herself but nothing for their family, and they decline that and go to the exchanges, what happens to them then? Was that the question?
No, I just said if we continue, this whole thing was based on you can keep your coverage, you can keep your insurance company, you keep your doctors, you can keep everything's going to be fine. Okay, so if we do that, all I know is it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars more, and that if I continue to cover, when I continue to cover the people that I'm covering, their family will have to go to the exchange and get coverage.
The generator controls the time, but my understanding is that because the business is in the small business exemption, you can do whatever you want or don't do whatever you want. You're not required to do any of those things. There's no tax, there's no mandate, there's no reporting requirement, there's no obligation for that business at all. I thank the gentlelady.
Gentlewoman, yield back her time.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll yield myself 1 minute. I might add in defense of perhaps not Mr. Webster's circumstance, but many others, it keeps that business small. It means they cannot grow their business, and it is a government mandate that will kill millions of jobs and new job creation in this country. I want to thank all four of you for being here today. Your testimony to the Rules Committee obviously is one that is very important. Your expert testimony, your opportunity to be before us is relished, I'm sure, by your colleagues, knowing that you would represent them on either side, not only Dr. Burgess, but also our dear friends that are Democrats. And I thank you for taking time not only for your preparation, but your time here today. And the three of you are thanked for being here and excused at this time. The gentleman, Dr. Burgess, if he chooses, may assume the normal position that he takes on the committee. Gentlewoman, well, it means that he sits at the end of the dais. And thank you very much. I see no further witnesses. I would yield to the gentlewoman from New York for two specific questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to put statement of administrative policy
without objection.
On the repeal of affordable health care and to insert statement by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The chair would note that the committee is meeting today on two bills, first H.R. 1062 and second H.R. 45, and we will proceed now. Both of these hearings are now closed, and we will proceed with an amendment, a motion here in just a minute, but the recognition for the committee that we will have two rules, one for each of those bills that we, H.R. 1062 and H.R. 45. Are there any questions about what we're doing before we proceed? I've had a chance to speak to the gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter, about this. We're now going to proceed and not come back later So the votes will be held now, and we've tried to turn up the heat as best we can, but we'll keep going. Chairman will now be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1062, the SEC Regulatory Accountability Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-10, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of orders against the amendments printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The committee has now heard the motion by the Vice Chairman of the committee, the gentlewoman, Dr. Fox. I now will yield myself for just a second to describe the rule. Obviously, this is a structured rule, 1 hour debate, controlled by the Committee on Financial Services. Rule makes an order 3 of the 4 available amendments. The amendment not made in order was not germane to the bill, and all of the germane amendments were made in order, and this represents what I think is a balanced rule. Is there any debate, discussion, or amendments?
Thank
The gentlewoman's
you, Mr. Chairman. I
recognized.
do have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order, give the necessary waivers for my amendment number 4, which would delay implementation of this bill till we have a law that subjects the political intelligence industry to the same requirements as lobbying, which is registration, disclosure, and limits on the revolving door between government and those trying to trade on their experience and contacts in government.
You've heard the amendment from the gentlewoman from New York. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I do.
Gentlewoman's
I know
recognized.
you've already mentioned that mine is not allowed because it's not germane, but we all know that that's exactly what we do. In fact, in this bill we just passed, there were number 3, number 5, number 7 statements of waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. I just simply want mine back in the report because we know that we can waive them if we want to. I want to point out, though it makes me sad, that 199 times in the last 2.5 years you have waived all the rules for the majority as compared to 5 times for the minority. I'd very much like it if you could see your way clear to make this 6 for us. We appreciate that, just to treat us the same way as you've treated your own. And so I can have an up or down vote on this. It is something I have worked on for 7 years, and it's very important to, I think, the country that we can get this done.
You've now heard the discussion, gentlewoman. I would offer a conciliatory chance to suggest to the gentlewoman that I am always, when a person of this committee brings forth an amendment, no matter which side it's on, I believe the staff tries their very darndest best to find a way to look for germaneness and to try and find a way for it to work. Not just being the ranking member here, but being a dear friend of mine, I have wanted to extend, and as the gentlewoman knows, that we've worked with your staff on a regular basis for amendments day in and day out that have come to the Rules Committee for us to work on germaneness.
But
and we have
199, that's pretty glaring, don't you think?
You know, as a matter of fact, almost every rule says we will waive, notwithstanding not to hold anything up on the floor, but even to Republican amendments, we offer those same germaneness. As you know, the germaneness rule is always pointed against the main bill and the things that it does, jurisdictions,
But
and
the
things.
199 were where you waived germaneness, and against the main bill.
You know what? I do respect that the gentlewoman has come armed with facts of the case that she
Yes.
believes is true, and I,
do.
in fact, at this time will tell you that I will go and look at those.
All right.
That it is my
I've got them
intent
down
not,
here, and if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask unanimous consent, put them in the record.
without objection,
All
we will enter that. So the gentlewoman is offering an amendment, and so I would respectfully oppose that. Those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Roll call, please.
The noes have. Gentlewoman asked for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman?
Look,
no.
report.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Is there further discussion or amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Gentlewoman's
I move to
recognized.
strike all the waivers of points of order from the rule.
Gentlewoman is asking something which to strike all points of order. I oppose that. Further discussion. Those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Roll call, please.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Chairman? No.
Clerk report.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
The Slaughter Amendment is not
Chairman, I want
agreed
to
to.
point
Gentlewoman
out
is
that
recognized.
You all just voted to waive, not to waive all the rules for your bill, but not for mine. And I think that needs to be said. I'm sorry to have to say it, but that is the fact.
In fact, the
Which is what
bill.
we do. We waive rules all the time.
You know what? In fact, what the gentlewoman brings up is perhaps entirely true and perhaps not, because what happens is the bill that is before the committee will contain pieces of what it's about, and it is germane to itself, to where I don't have to waive points of order against the bill.
If I could get 60 minutes to run this again, would you all sign on it a second time?
You know what? I do understand that the gentlewoman is very interested. I do understand that she's interested
Insider
in her.
trading by Congress.
Well, I would just tell you that given that opportunity to handle that bill, I'm sure I'll be glad to speak with the gentlewoman about it. This is
Senator
not.
Grassley and I will be filing.
I appreciate the gentlewoman. That is not the focus of today's activities, and I do respect the gentlewoman. And as always, will make myself available to hear from the gentlewoman so that we may
Appreciate
thoughtfully undertake that process.
Thank you very much.
Further amendment or debate? We will now move to the motion at hand. The gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor of Mrs. Fox's amendment, motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? Aye. Ms. Ross-Leitman? Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern? Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk report.
8 yeas, 2 nays.
The motion by the gentlewoman of North Carolina is agreed to. I will be managing for the Republicans.
And Mr. McGovern.
Mr. McGovern will be handling on behalf of the minority. We will now move to a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina, H.R. 45.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 45 to repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and health care-related provisions in the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010, a closed rule, The rule provides 2 hours of debate equally divided among and controlled by the respective chairs and ranking minority members of the Committee on Education, the Workforce, Energy and Commerce, and Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted. The rule provides that the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've now heard a motion by the gentlewoman, the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Fox. Are there any amendments or discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have an
Gentlewoman's
amendment.
recognized.
I move the committee grant H.R. 45 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor.
Appreciate the gentlewoman's amendment. I would oppose that amendment. It's a straight up or down vote. And appreciate the gentleman. Other further discussion?
I do have a little, if I may.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this is your party's 37th attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That's countless man hours and woman hours and a grand total of $52.4 million wasted in taxpayer dollars on a repeal that will actually add over $109 billion to the deficit were it to be enacted and signed. Mr. Chairman, it's time to stop moving the country backwards. It's time to stop playing political games and turn our focus to what's important now. Let's grant this 37th repeal an open rule, and so that amendments that could actually help this bill and Americans consequently by it will be helped to have that to be considered on the floor, and we can start once again to move our country forward.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. Further discussion? I would yield myself a minute. I appreciate the gentlewoman, not only her support of the bill that she's voted for in the past, and I do recognize that this issue continues to be a huge debate around the country with some 25 million people unemployed or underemployed, with the primary reason being this Affordable Care Act. I would note that my party, the Republican Party, has for a number of years now been extremely concerned about the impacts of this bill, the fraud that was perpetrated on the American people, not only with the name of the Affordable Care Act, but also pieces of the legislation which we have voted to remove that has not passed but has been a part of legislation, including the $70 billion that was under the Class Act that was then used as a pay-for in the with the tax increase at the end of last year. The bill continues to maintain its priority in a standing that will diminish American jobs, competitiveness, and place Americans in a detrimental position with their doctor, with their health care provider, and thus I want to say I wholeheartedly would be opposed to the gentlewoman's amendment. Further discussion?
Well, we'll see, Mr. Chairman, we'll see.
We'll now call the question. Those in favor of the Salter Amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No. Roll call, please.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen? Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? We now move to the vote on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor of the gentlewoman's motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it.
Roll call.
A roll call.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? Aye. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern? Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis?
No.
Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report.
8 yeas, 2 nays.
The motion passes. and is agreed to. The gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, will be managing the rule for Republicans.
And I'll manage for minority.
And the gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter, will be managing for the minority. I want to thank all the members of the committee. I recognize that your time is important, and the testimony that was taken today by our expert witnesses took time to come before this committee. You being here present at such an important hearing is important, and I want to thank everyone. I do not anticipate that we will have further meetings this week, and this hearing is now closed.